Special meeting of the Bellflower City Council. It is Thursday, April 23, 2020. It is 10:16 by my watch, and I'm calling this meeting to order. Before we begin, please note that all public meetings will be recorded. When a participant logs in via the computer or calls to join the meeting, their name and/or phone number will be available to all participants, Unless you are provided public comment, your audio will be muted and your video will be disabled. Persons wishing to be audience members to the meeting may do so anonymously. Anonymous participants, however, will not be recognized for public comment. Persons who seek to bypass the city's host controls will be dropped and blocked from the meeting. Thank you for your cooperation. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Dutton.
Here.
Councilmember Hamada.
Here.
Councilmember Santinas.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Coops.
Here.
Mayor Garza.
Here. Thank you, Madam City Clerk. Item number 3, public comments. Mr. Stewart.
Pursuant to Government Code Section 54954.3A, the public may address the City Council on matters listed on the agenda. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes to address the City Council.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Madam City Clerk, do we have any members of the public wishing to make comments at this point in time?
Mayor, I'm not seeing any public comments at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Item number 4A, Mr. Stewart.
This is an item, one single consideration item today, and it comes in light of the county and state of California's Operation Room Key program, and the agenda item is entitled Consideration of Possible Action regarding the County of Los Angeles decision to implement Project Room Key at the Motel 6 located at 17220 Downey Avenue. And, do you want to start, Mr. Mayor? Do you want me to start? How do you want to do this?
You know what? Let me start off right quick, and then I'm just going to make a couple points, and then do you mind filling in the gaps of whatever I missed, Mr. City Manager?
That works. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So thank you, members of the City Council and staff, and everyone that's present on the call for joining us this morning. I think, as we all know, the calling for special council meetings is something that we don't do lightly. But we think that, considering the topic of this morning, that it's important that not only that we share with you as soon as possible as the members of the City Council, but also with the community in terms of a project that's potential at this point in time. We still haven't gotten final word, but in the interest of transparency and to be able to share with everyone. So the background right quick is that earlier this week, we were notified that the Motel 6 in our city over on Downey Avenue and the 91 freeway was being looked at as a potential participant in the state's Project Room Key effort. For those of you that don't know, Project Room Key is a project that's being coordinated. It was initiated by the governor, and it's being locally implemented by the County of Los Angeles. And the objective is to house homeless people that are considered to be highly probable to contract COVID-19. And so the way the program works is that people that fit this profile that are most susceptible, which is 65 and over, and that have underlying conditions, would be expeditiously located and transferred into hotels for them to weather this out. And so, again, the Motel 6 in our city has been identified as one of those hotels. The governor's office, and I don't want to say for sure county staff, but I believe county staff is involved in this at some level, have been working very closely with especially 2 chains of hotels, which is, one is Equality Inns, and 2 Motel 6s throughout the region and throughout the state to be able to participate in this program. They're not the only hotel chains, though, that are participating. There are others as well. For example, I think in the city of Whittier, I believe that in their case, I think it's a DoubleTree that's participating for them. So to my knowledge, their goal is to have up to 15,000 people housed, again, as soon as possible. And so what we've been informed here at the local level is that if in case Motel 6 is selected, the one that's here in Bellflower, selected to participate in this, if the state and the local hotel operator come to an agreement that the objective would be to house, again, homeless people 65 and over that are susceptible to COVID-19, but that don't have it yet, and to house them, but it would be, the population that would be transferred in there would be homeless people that are within SPA 7. Again, that's the word that we've gotten. And again, in the interest of transparency, I thought it was important that this be disclosed to the council and to our community. I do have questions and some general comments, but I'm not ready for those yet. But in the interest of just the introduction, I'll hand it off to Mr. Stewart for any other comments that he may have.
I think you covered it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. City Manager. So at this point, I would like to ask our city attorney basically to also give us a perspective from his perspective from a legal and just give us a legal overview over what options the city has available at this point in time before we move on to questions from our council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Good morning. I will say this from the start that this project is frustrating from a standpoint of being able to get information. The information that we have been able to get are primarily from the governor's website, and this links back to the executive order, which was originally Executive Order N32-201. As you may have read in the paper or have discussed amongst yourselves, the governor reached out to FEMA. So this Project Room Key is actually something that was implemented on or about April 3rd, 2020, and it's going to be 75% reimbursed by FEMA, which was confirmed by a letter that we actually were able to track down from FEMA with regard to this. Just as a legal framework, just so that there's some common understanding about how the state and counties interact. Counties, unlike cities, are actually subdivisions of the state of California. So when the state of California implements something, so for example, if the governor issues an executive order, the counties can be directed by the governor's office to implement that order in the manner that the state sees fit, which is one of the reasons that you see that Project Room Key is being implemented by LA County. And that's important from a legal standpoint. And the reason for that is this, which is if the counties are implementing state directives, if there's very little that the city as a general law city can do to try to resist that type of implementation. It is important to understand that there are two different programs. One is Project Room Key, which is what we're talking about today. The other is the LA County's Medical Sheltering Site program, which is specific for persons who have been identified as having COVID-19 and have to be in quarantine. So Project Room Key is really an extension of, I think, what the governor was doing before COVID-19 came about in terms of trying to find shelter for homeless. And this has been an opportunity to try to make sure that those folks that are the most vulnerable are properly housed and whatnot. And I think that's part of the at least the governor's mission in implementing this. The reason that we are a bit frustrated in terms of being able to provide information to the council and in general and provide legal advice in general is there's very little information. There have been lots of representations made by county officials. They're including in writing as part of frequently asked questions. But when you delve deeper, there's really no additional, well, as you know, I'd like to have things in writing that are actually legalese. There's nothing that we can identify that actually obligates the county, for example, to pay transient occupancy taxes. There's been a lot of verbal representations from Los and other county officials that this will actually happen, and it's actually in the FAQs, the frequently asked questions that are provided by the county. But we have not been able to identify any legal document whereby, for example, the Board of Supervisors have committed to paying TOTs or what have you. And as a legal matter, government entities are never required to pay taxes. So it would have to be a special effort for either the state or the county to be actually paying TOTs to local jurisdictions. I know that in the paper, there have been various reports of cities fighting against Project Room Key. Actually today, as a matter of circumstance, there's a hearing in front of Judge Carter with regard to the cities of Bell Gardens and Mondale. And there was, I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, there was actually a Board of Supervisors resolution to authorize the county council to file a lawsuit against the city of, had it right here in front of me, but sorry.
I believe it was Norwalk.
Norwalk, yes, thank you. I knew it started with an N, but I didn't want to misrepresent it. So it is the city of Norwalk, which actually imposed a moratorium on hotels being able to do this. Quite honestly, and I'll say this in public, I think that this is a steep hill that I wouldn't actually recommend that the city council engaging in terms of challenging these orders and having the hotels be opened up to the homeless pursuant to Project Room Key. And the reason for that is twofold. One is you will expend a tremendous amount of money trying to fight it. And secondarily, although I can make a number of arguments, and as the council well knows, I'm happy to make those arguments on an ongoing basis with a number of different subjects. And I think they're good arguments, but at the end of the day, the emergency and COVID-19 and the power of the state and the power of the county are ultimately, I think, going to overcome any of those arguments. Part of the reason for my pessimism on this is that, for example, even though this particular hotel has a conditional use permit that was issued in 1987, and arguably the city could go about revoking that CUP, because if the county enters into an agreement with a hotel, the hotel would technically be in violation of its CUP, mainly because municipal code, for example, has limits on stay of 30 days, requires TOTs to be paid, and has a whole host of other regulations. But again, I think the emergency is going to overcome that, and there are some interesting definitions in our municipal code when it comes to hotels, for example, which I could get into if you wanted, but I think the county could point to those definitions and simply say, well, we're using this as, for example, a government institution for purposes of protecting the public. I think the better option for the council, if it wishes to, is to sort of nibble around the sides, if you will. And when I say that, it's to make sure that the city is not stuck holding the bag once this program terminates. And while the program's in place, that the city is not stuck paying for the cost of potentially additional law enforcement that would report to those locations. And the reason I say that is because, of course, these hotels are not jails. People are free to come and go as they will. And going back to my initial comments on there's not a lot of information, although the county has put out information stating that, for example, a loss of service provider will be at the hotel, will monitor guest behavior, and if guests get out of hand, that they will be terminated from the program. We don't know what terminated from the program means. Does that mean that they're kicked out of the front door and then we, the city of Bellflower, are left with the cleanup in terms of law enforcement and trying to get these folks back to where they originally came from? We don't know. And what happens at the end of the emergency? Let's say at the end of 90 days, the governor lifts the emergency and the county lifts the emergency, which means that the emergency for which this hotel was contracted with is over. What happens to the guests at that point? Are they asked to get back onto a bus and bus back to wherever they originally were brought onto the bus? There's no explanation for that. So the idea that I had, perhaps, that the council may want to kick around is, for example, having a second response ordinance adopted, which would allow the city to collect for the extra law enforcement costs associated with any additional response to locations. That's one option. We have something that we can put together quickly, even for the Monday's agenda, and that would consist of both an urgency ordinance and a regular ordinance. An urgency ordinance can actually be adopted on Monday, and then the regular ordinance would follow. So those are sort of the ideas that I have initially. Again, I go back to my original observation, which is there isn't a lot of information out there about this. There's a lot of anecdotal information about this. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Carl, one complication I thought of is after 30 or 60 days, they become tenants, right? They're no longer guests in the hotel. And then I'm worried about.
Yeah, I mean, that's an open question is do they suddenly get a possessory right in that hotel? I can make the argument in favor of that. I could also.
Well, I could too. That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
So.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. City Attorney, Mr. City Manager. Any other comments, Mr. City Manager, before I move on to questions?
No, I think Carl outlined it best. He and I talked about it quite a bit yesterday, and I think those are our ways forward on that. I did want to share something just for the general knowledge. We dug up the registration from the Secretary of State, and that is not a company-owned motel. That's owned by an individual, Amar Patel, out of Cerritos, California. So I don't know where the negotiations started, and at least his representation to our officials who were on site yesterday was that he doesn't know anything about this. Now, I have no idea if he's telling the truth or not.
Yes.
So,
just, you know, I'm glad you brought that up in terms of the inspection of the hotel. I think in the interest of ensuring that if this hotel is ultimately signs on to this program and ends up participating in this thing, I think part of our responsibility here as local officials is to ensure that if there's any facility like that that's identified and moves forward, that conditions be appropriate for this population. And I think there's no question that the fact that Bellflower has a vested interest in this population, the fact that our city is literally in the final stages of finalizing our shelter that we have here, which is unique to the region, as people know. So because of the fact that we care about this population, we did conduct inspections on the hotel. And if you want to go over those results, Mr. City Manager.
We went over there. We started thinking about multiple issues that could come up. So we made the decision to go ahead and do a public safety and building code inspection on the property. So our guys went out there and they reviewed every room on the site, the different locations, and they found numerous minor violations, but found the facility to be overall in pretty good shape. So we have no ongoing health. We're going to issue them a list of corrections they need to make, but we have no ongoing health and safety concerns about the hotel going in, at least.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Let me start off with just a couple questions. Most of them were already answered, but any CUP conditions on this hotel? Anything of interest in there?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the resolution that adopted the CUP is from 1987. It's a fairly standard CUP from the standpoint of this is a hotel. We're incorporating municipal code provisions into the CUP. And again, that goes back to my initial observations and discussions, which is ordinarily a transitory guest is limited to 30 days within a hotel. And there are various other provisions in the municipal code, specifically with regard to TOT, guest registration, obligations of the hotel owner to keep track of hotel guests and what have you. You know, honestly, if the council wanted to, or if the city wanted to, you could initiate a code enforcement action against the hotel owner. I don't know from a practical or legal standpoint how well that would go over, particularly since more than likely the lease, whatever lease is entered into with the county, which again, I haven't seen, so I don't really know what's in it, would cause the county to defend and indemnify the hotel owner against any type of legal action that the city might initiate. And so ultimately we would again be going up against the county, which has a greater budget than does the city of Bellflower.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much for that, City Attorney. Just filed a full disclosure in asking for an update from our county staff earlier this morning. My understanding is that this thing is not final yet. It most likely will be final, but as the last word that we've gotten has been that it's not final yet. Now, to the city attorney's point before, and Mr. City Manager, getting concrete information has been a challenge. So wait and see what the final word is on that. But again, the last word that we've gotten is that this thing is not, signed in stone yet. The other question that I had was regarding, and I think the city attorney touched on that in terms of recuperating any costs. So like law enforcement costs potentially, so that would be something that by our action on Monday, if the council decides to move forward, that we would try to recoup in case if there's any paramedic costs or law enforcement related costs that are increased because of if this thing goes forward and if this population requires it at the facility?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So we did take a look at the municipal code to see whether or not there was what's really called a second response regulation. And although there is 2 or 3 sentences with regard to being able to recover a quote unquote fee for additional costs. In reading it, I don't think that it adequately addresses the situation that we're in now, and would cause the city not to be able to recover all of its potential law enforcement and other response costs associated, or potentially associated. I'm not saying that it would be, but potentially associated with a use like this. So my recommendation would be certainly to beef up that particular section if this is something that the council would want to do, and we can certainly be prepared for that for Monday's meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. City Attorney. And then the last question I have for now is, Mr. City Manager, by any chance from county staff, have we heard about an exit strategy? It feels like there's a big rush to get things done in the front end, but I really haven't seen anything on the back end. Have you heard anything?
Nothing. The only thing I know is that they've talked about the term of agreement being for 3 months with several 1-month extensions, and no discussion. And I don't believe they have a draft, a formula on how they're going to exit people out of there. So.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. City Manager. So that completes my question. So let me open it up now to my colleagues on the council. Let's start off with Mayor Pro Tem Coops.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Jeff, you mentioned that we've engaged Mr. Patel, and he indicated that he has had no conversation with the county as of yet. Is that true?
Yeah, he asked me, went on site when we got word that this was being considered. Originally, I over the years, I'd heard about health and safety, potential health and safety considerations on that site. So I got concerned, and I sent the building inspectors out there to look at the site and look for health and safety violations and building code violations. And while in so doing, they met with the manager, who happened to be the owner, and he asked why we're out there and told the truth, and he said he had no knowledge of that. And then he went further to say, I wouldn't even allow homeless in here. Now, I don't know if that was the truth or not, but he was very cooperative with our people when he went out there. So that's the only knowledge I have on that.
So the mayor indicated that the governor had cut a deal with Quality Inn and with Hotel 6. Is that so that it's all inclusive? So if you have that franchise, the deal has already been struck, and that you just got to flitter along?
Well, I think I saw a press release somewhere that said they'd struck it with corporate. So I don't believe that to be true, but I could be wrong. So.
And Mr. Mayor, members of the council, if I can just tag team on that, the information we've been able to glean, again, this is quite honestly, these are website searches in sort of particular areas that we know might bring up additional information. The information we've been able to find is that indeed the state has negotiated a master agreement with Motel 6, and Motel 6 would make all of its corporate-owned locations statewide available to counties for use with Project Roomkey. And apparently, Bellflower has 5 hotels under negotiation for a total of 729 rooms. So I realize we're talking about one specific location, but according to the information we've been able to find, again, there are potentially 5 hotels under negotiation.
Has any of the operators in Bellflower indicated they've been contacted?
Not by me. I've not heard it.
Okay. So the key word, I think, what Carl read was all the corporate Hotel 6s would be included. Would that exclude the franchisees like Mr. Patel is?
Like I said, I don't know where corporate stops and where Mr. Patel begins. So I would have no idea if that affects it or not.
Now here's a question for the city attorney. Does the state and the county, it's like a War Powers Act, they can invoke on this no matter what the guy wants or says, this is going to be done and you're going to like it. Do they have that authority with private property?
The emergency powers of both the state and the county and actually the city are quite broad. I'm sure you've seen in the news about folks that are, especially in the state legislature, for example, that are growing uncomfortable with how broad those powers are. But from a legal perspective, not to get too wonky on this, but the Constitution actually doesn't empower the state. It actually puts restrictions on the state. And so when you're in a state of emergency, those checks and balances are very much taken, not completely away, but they are very much relaxed. And so the full power of the police powers of the state can be implemented in order to protect public health and safety, which is what you're seeing, and why the governor is able to simply issue executive orders without any oversight from the legislature. So to answer your question, it's not specifically war powers, but it's similar to that. It's police powers. And so the answer to your question really is yes. Absent somebody being able to get a court order, which would be difficult under the circumstances that we're in, to prevent certain things from happening, it's the powers are very, very broad. And to not to kick a dead horse, but you know, the chances of the city of Bellflower being able to challenge those types of orders, I think, are small.
All right. Well, that answers all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember Dutton.
Thank you, Mayor. I got some questions. Probably anybody can, staff or anybody that knows the answer. Juan, you mentioned that the tenants of Motel 6 would be 65 and over or underlying health conditions. Is that the only qualification to get in?
According to the Q&A that's been shared with us by county staff regarding this program, that is our understanding. I'm not sure if the city attorney disagrees with that statement.
Gotcha.
So I'll give you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, if you wish, I can give you what we found. The qualifications are homeless and high risk, but asymptomatic. And the examples given are 65 years of age or older, chronic lung disease or moderate to severe asthma, serious heart conditions, conditions that can cause a person to be immunocompromised, severe obesity, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, and who are undergoing dialysis and liver disease, or been exposed to COVID-19 as documented by a state or local public health official or medical health professional that do not require hospitalization but need isolation or quarantine, and COVID-19 positive but who don't need hospitalization. So those are the three categories. The information we've found is all guests must be pre-screened and selected by a homeless services provider or referred.
Lost audio there. I'm assuming you're done.
I lost audio as well. I think his video feed cut off.
Video feed, okay.
Yeah.
So
You know,
my question also is, to follow up, would drug addicts be underlying health conditions? Because we know a good percentage of our homeless population are drug addicts.
If they're, Ray, I'm going to speculate, and it's only that until Carl gets back on. If they're over 65, it's probably a non-related factor.
Well, yeah, but if you're 30 and your brain's spun out on drugs, that would be an underlying health condition.
But they wouldn't, yeah. I mean, I don't know that that is an underlying health condition, but that's a better question for the county and how they're going to enforce it.
And then is the homeless tenants of the Motel 6 or any other motel that they get, are they able to come and go, or they got to shelter down and continue to stay in the room? Or do we know that?
You can't lock them in. They have to stay in place or like everybody else, but they're going to come and go.
Come and go just like everybody else.
That's one interesting, if I could just chime in, council member, that's one thing that I find ironic in this whole thing, is that the intent is to isolate them as much as possible to prevent them from contracting this disease, this virus. And as we've been told by the public health officials, you know, stay inside, stay home unless you really need to. But yet, and so they're being isolated for that purpose, but yet at the same time, they're going to be allowed to go out whenever they want, which increases that risk. So to me, it's like counterintuitive. So
yeah, I figured that isolation in the riverbeds and under the freeway bridges and in the bushes and in abandoned cars, that all those people would be isolated. The only ones that, you know, concerned, and I've been banging this drum for a while, are the ones in every intersection that live on one of the corners of the intersection and do their dancing through the day there. But yeah, it doesn't make sense. So all tenants of this room key program in Bellflower are all coming at a SPA 7?
That's the report that we got during a briefing call that we had on Tuesday. The city manager and I was that the participants that would come into this hotel, if the agreement happens with the hotel, would be SPA 7 people.
Yeah, gotcha. To my colleagues that don't know what SPA 7 is, it's one of the areas is it groups a bunch of different cities together for the homeless counts. And again, one of my questions that was already answered was the length of time and also the exit strategy. And obviously, we don't know a length of time, and there is no exit strategy. So that leads me to one question. So we're trying to put a shelter up. Our little town is trying to get a handle on our homeless problem, and yet we're going to bring several other cities homeless to our town. Can we immediately, so we have a court order from Judge Carter to, if we have a place to put our homeless, we can start putting them there. We have a homeless facility that's not up and running yet. So if one of these motels get running here in Bellflower, do we have something, if our homeless qualifies, can we get our homeless in that facility that's in our town?
That is, if Carl's back on, Carl, that's yours.
I don't see him back on.
Yeah.
That's
No, I'm back on. It's just, I don't know what's wrong with my computer. That's the first time that's ever happened. So my apologies for that. I'm sorry, repeat the question. I was texting Myra.
Yeah, I was just wondering, we got the court order that says we can start moving our homeless off the streets if we have a shelter. Well, if the county has a shelter within our boundaries, can we kind of start using that to put them there if that qualifies? Well, if they qualify for that shelter.
You and I are thinking along the same lines because I had the same thought. And I guess my observation is conceptually, why not?
I think we ought to make a point to try to fill as many of those rooms with our homeless as soon as it opens.
Carl, secondarily, on a homeless shelter, if the county or LASA were to seek and establish a homeless shelter in the city, let's say they're going to buy that hotel and convert it, what kind of oversight, what kind of regulation authority would we have over that type of a use in the Artesia specific plan area there?
Well, I guess I will use the phrase that everybody hates from lawyers. It depends.
It depends.
If the county and the state are utilizing their emergency powers, again, our ability to try to prevent anything is significantly limited. If, however, we're outside of the emergency and they're simply doing it as a matter of course, we may have a greater opportunity to try to regulate land use and what have you. That said, there is a concept called intergovernmental immunity, which allows separate legal entities to take action under different circumstances. Now, that sometimes those things are limited. So generally speaking, for example, just put it into a school district context, a school district is allowed to build school facilities without city oversight if the board of trustees votes to do so. But ordinarily it's supposed to comply with the local land use regulations, what have you. So again, I don't mean to get wonky on you, but it does depend. That's a little bit
different though, because the school still has oversight from the state architect's office, et cetera, et cetera. This has not. This is nothing. I guess what I'm getting at is, if they're putting people there for 90 days, which it appears that they are, and then they go month to month afterwards, it seems to me they're erecting a homeless shelter by happenstance, because those people are going to become tenants of that facility.
Yes.
I guess my question is, do we have the ability, given the length of time that agreement is, to treat that as a permanent facility trying to be established in the community? And not just for sake of necessarily denial, but just meeting the codes of what a homeless facility should be.
I would say conceptually, yes. But of course, as I always point out, who knows what a court implements. But as a legal argument, I would say yes. And obviously, we would need to have some verification at some point, and we do have an order in place, obviously.
Right.
And we would probably seek to have that order amended in order to clarify that not only, or to try to change where our temporary shelter is and designate it as a different location. So that's kind of what I would do.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah.
Great. Any other questions, Mr. Dutton?
Yeah, I have one more that Carl drove out of me. He mentioned that there was possibly at least 5 hotels under possibly wanting to do this or been asked. Do we know what brands or what hotels those are?
I don't have that information.
No.
That goes back to my observation that it's very difficult to actually track information down.
Track down which one. It just there was just a number of up the file. Got it.
Mr. Dutton,
Correct.
today was the first I've heard of that, so I have no information either. Yeah.
Yeah, I maybe we ought to send code enforcement to all the hotels and do a little groundwork or something and check what's going on and then let them at least know our displeasure of doing something like that.
Yeah, we can identify the likely suspects.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to be the
Yeah.
smaller ones. It's going to be the larger
Right.
hotels. And there's a handful of those. We could probably sort that out. Yeah.
Because when it boils down to it, I'm big about property rights, and there's if you have property, there's property rights, and you get to choose what you want to do with it. That's all I got, Mayor.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilmember Dutton. Councilmember Raymond Hamada.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First off, I want to thank Carl for that thorough analysis. And it's addressing a lot of my questions. And but first, I wanted to start off with a comment that successful governance really requires partnerships that present timely and complete communication. And on this one, obviously, we're disappointed that just kind of dropped in our laps. I know last week that I did read some article, I think it was online, about Motel 6 doing something like this. And so I mentioned to staff and nobody had heard. So it's just how quickly things change here. So, I mean, just over a matter of a weekend. Just for, again, disclosure too, I did have a chat with county staff, just some questions, general questions. And also in looking at the frequently asked questions, it makes reference to using service providers. And I'm not sure to what extent. I assume, yes, LASA, PATH, and so on, but it might include some of our local service providers. So I just want to disclose again, I'm on the board of directors of Kingdom Causes Bellflower, and I'm a volunteer. And so that should be no issue. I have not heard anything from Kingdom Causes that they will be participating. But a lot of the, again, there's numerous articles out there and you read them and you're going, you scratch your head and then you're thinking, wonder what's up and so on. But again, some of the comments have come up already. One in particular about what happens at the end. And I remember reading one article about one comment, I think it was from the governor, stating that these could be converted to permanent facilities. So that's a toss up there. Again, how these are really going to operate, and if it operates like a homeless facility, do we expect then the regular, active services, the other resources, job training, some of the other things that are going to happen that help to keep these people moving along? But first off, obviously taking care of their health. But some of the other questions, again, what are we going to do? Again, what's going to happen with all their personal possessions? And a lot of them have pets. And it's just, I know I looked online for Motel 6, and Motel 6 doesn't mention anything on their website about this, but they refer to Bellflower as Los Angeles / Bellflower. So if you're to look for a Motel 6 in Bellflower, you don't find it until you look in LA. So, and also then took an opportunity to look at reviews. And again, some of the comments mentioned about, and it's great that staff took the time to inspect the facility. There were various comments again about broken ACs and property maintenance and just room care and so on. So hopefully, again, something at least if this starts, it starts fresh, starts in working condition, and again, hopefully, if it moves forward, it's only utilized for what it's intended to. Again, also raised the question about the TOT. So again, that's a toss-up, and again, the costs related to the sheriff. So that's a toss-up right now, and some of the other things that popped into mind. So with the county taking this over, so to speak, do they accept all liability? And are they adding more insurance then to these facilities? We're not sure how this is going to look at the end of the stay. And is Motel 6 getting extra money to remodel all their facilities after this? Not sure, since we were not a party to the contract. Those details and again, everything there. So it just poses a lot of questions. Again, the corporate. I did also read that there was some reference about, again, they were only dealing with corporate facilities, it's just something. Yes, again, Bellflower has shown that we're compassionate. We work diligently during times of urgency. It's again from our bold decision to start up that homeless shelter. Again, needs to be out there when future decisions are made. Again, not sure again how this is all going to work. I know we all have questions, so there's a lot of wait and see, I think, and within a matter of a few hours, probably there'll be some other changes. So again, I just want to thank everybody for staying on top of this, and hopefully we're up to speed, and know that Linda's on the line here too. So if she's given any opportunity to make any presentation, so again, we'll hopefully figure it all out and move forward. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you so much, Councilmember. And it just before we move on to Councilmember something else, again, just a reminder that there's a lot of information that we don't know, and ordinarily, by tradition, the City Council and the staff tends to not go this route. We tend to always vet things in public to make sure that we're able to answer these questions. This is reflective of the fact that this is the opposite. This is something that we're all learning from. But again, in the interest of full transparency with our community and with the council, that I thought it was important that we bring this up as soon as possible, just to ensure that it's in the radar. One of the case studies of how not to do things happened, unfortunately, in the city of Bell Gardens, where they themselves were not informed at all. In fact, they found out through the media that their hotel was selected, and their community to this day is still incensed about the fact that that this wasn't shared with them, that their electeds were not shared this information either. And so I know that will have long-term repercussions in terms of that situation. I'm thankful for the fact that in our case, Linda Johnson, who works for Supervisor Han, as we all know, that she was forthright, and I thank her for making us aware of this, and again, in full transparency. So again, thank you for your patience, especially staff, because I know we're bombarding them with questions that they unfortunately do not have at this point in time. But again, I thank everyone for this. And then last but not least, Councilmember Santinez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to apologize. I lost connection earlier, so I don't know if this was covered in Carl's presentation. How many rooms do we expect Motel 6 to make available? Do we know?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I don't have that information. And I only, again, it goes back to the lack of information that we have.
Oh, okay.
Can
All
I,
right, so-
if I could just inform right quick, the information that was shared with the city manager and I a couple of days ago was that the target here locally in Bellflower would be for 127 rooms.
Right. That's what we
For the-
heard.
For the whole city.
No, for the hotel. They were just going to book that hotel and make 127 rooms available for Spa Area 7, Spa 7.
Yeah.
Okay, and then part of the discussion earlier was that they're trying to negotiate a total of about 700 rooms in the city, right?
Yeah,
Is that correct?
that was brand new to me. Carl just sprung that on me. Thanks, Carl.
I did not
Okay,
know
okay.
that either, so.
All right. Yeah, well, I must kind of, for the benefit of the audience here, that to remind everyone that Bellflower is a very compassionate city. And that's why we took the extra effort to build a shelter in the city of Bellflower. And we're one of the first, we're the first city in LA County to do that. And what really frustrates me is we took a lot of effort to set up that shelter with the goal of helping those who are homeless in our city. And I'm really proud of the action of the council and staff to make that happen. But what frustrates me is hearing that we will basically cater to the needs of SPA 7. So it's to me, it's a backdoor approach, backdoor way of, for lack of a better word, of dumping the homeless in SPA 7 in the city of Bellflower. So that's, to me, is the most part out of this discussion. Again, I just want to make sure that people understand that we are compassionate. We want to take care of the homeless, but we want to take care of the homeless in the city of Bellflower. And I firmly believe that if every city will just take care of their own, I think this problem will be solved. Having said that, what's gonna, since there's no exit strategy yet, I'm just trying to figure out the end game for this. Once if the homeless that are being sheltered in Motel 6, for example, are not behaving and were kicked out, and so they'll be roaming the streets, and as discussed earlier, we will be incurring additional sheriff costs and things like that. So the question here is, what's going to happen once our shelter is operating and we do our cleanup in the city? And I'm just speculating there's going to be more homeless out in the streets in the city of Bellflower, whether they're from the city or from somewhere else. I'm speculating and projecting there's going to be more. So there'll be increased costs in terms of our sheriff trying to relocate them. And so once that happens, I'm expecting that, well, the question here is, if the emergency power is still in place, what will prevail? Can we implement our agreement with Judge Carter if the emergency power is still in place?
Carl, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So I'll try to answer that. First, going back to my observation about emergency powers from the state and county level, they're extremely broad. And as you know, the city is also operating under emergency powers. Sort of my knee-jerk reaction right now is my original observation, which is perhaps on Monday, the council wants to direct us to bring back an ordinance with regard to being able to collect for second response costs associated with law enforcement for these particular areas. Well, and quite frankly, for any area within the city, it's not specific toward this hotel or for this particular problem, but it's a good thing to have on the books in any event. But it would certainly try to address this specific problem that we're talking about. With regard to Judge Carter's order and the court order that we have in place, that order is going to still be there. The only question is if there's an incompatibility between the emergency actions that whether it's the city or the county believe need to take place and that order. The emergency is going to take precedence. So if there is an emergency that requires immediate attention, we won't have time to go into the court on an emergency basis. Even if we were to call up the clerk and ask for an immediate hearing, under those circumstances, we would exercise our emergency powers to try to take care of whatever the situation was. But my feeling is that, as I think the city manager noted at the beginning of the meeting, and I think Councilmember Denton pointed out, is if this hotel is designated for homeless sheltering, why shouldn't we be able to transport folks to that hotel and use it for our own homeless population, which we already know exists, and that's the whole reason that we are building the temporary shelter in the first place. From that perspective, I believe that we should be able to enforce our anti-nuisance regulations now, even before the temporary shelter is built. If indeed this agreement is in place between the county and the hotel, well, that means that we have beds available for homeless folks that are out on the streets right now, which was the whole reason that we're building the temporary shelter in the first place, which is to demonstrate that indeed there are beds available and there is shelter available for the homeless that are on the streets right now. And if we can point to this hotel, from a legal perspective, I believe that we should be able to do that.
Well, I think so too, but they need to meet the criteria set by the county for us to be able to refer them to Motel 6. Because if they're, let's say, very young and they're not, they don't have any heart condition or lung disease, things like that, I don't think that the county will accept them.
And I don't disagree with you. I think it certainly would be at least a debate with the county. But one of the criteria in our consent decree in any event is for the initial contact with homeless folks that are refusing to comply with the anti-nuisance regulations is to try to get them into the quote-unquote bigger system. And that would include the county system. And if they meet the qualifications for that particular hotel, it would seem to me that they would be candidates for local transport to that hotel and for that shelter. The consent decree lays out that the city's own temporary shelter is supposed to be used in the event that folks refuse to go into the greater county program and they have a link to Bellflower somehow. That's when they go into the Bellflower's temporary shelter. But I apologize for not having all the answers. Part of the problem is the lack of factual information, so it's difficult for me to give you a right line analysis on this. But conceptually speaking, it seems to me that we should be able to get them into the county system and get them into that hotel if they meet those qualifications.
Well, I understand, and I appreciate your response on these questions, but I think these are very good discussions so that we can be ready to address this as they come up. And thank you for your response, Carl. One thing that I want to ask staff is to be ready for an exit strategy that once the emergency power is lifted, what happens to the occupants of the rooms at Motel 6? I don't want the answer right now, but I think that's something that needs to be addressed. Okay, thank you, Mayor. That's all I have.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilmember Santinez, and members of the City Council. I just wanted to make just some general comments, and in the spirit of full disclosure, just to share with everyone on this call, not only my comments, but also some of the concerns that I've conveyed to Supervisor Hahn's staff. First of all, I think it was said over and over in this meeting today that I just wanted to go on record that Bellflower has done the right thing. We are building our shelter. We have acknowledged that this problem exists, and so we are one of the few cities that is trying to do the right thing in addressing our homeless population. So that the fact that, again, we are spending our own money building a shelter right now that it's literally about to go online within less than a month, it's important to know. The reality is that other cities aren't doing what we're doing. And the fact is that other cities do not have to do or participate in Project Room Key. So the fact that other cities are not having to do this, and now Bellflower is being double burdened, is frankly unfair, and it's inequitable.
Well, Juan, just be more specific. I mean, as I indicated in the meeting with Ms. Johnson 2 days ago, we have no evidence that there's any plan to move into any facilities in Paramount or Lakewood. So this is exactly what we were trying to avoid when our discussions with the residents of Cedar Street, that we weren't importing those homeless people into our community. And the county's quite aware of that, and that's what they're seeking to do. And that's the source of the real angst here.
And so, and so again, to me, this is going to be, I think, in the future is going to be a case study into not how to do things, and how you start enacting unfair and inequitable policy. Again, the fact that there's no exit strategy on this thing, that is just wrong. The fact that there's no long-term plan for this is completely wrong. The fact that we have no final figures in terms of how much this is going to cost, how many people, all the details that we need that is apparent from this meeting that we don't have the answers to, the fact that it hasn't been shared with us is completely wrong. And again, these comments have been shared with Supervisor Hahn's staff. So I'm well aware that Supervisor Hahn is aware of our thoughts. You know, I want to share that there's been increased amount of media stories coming out how, unfortunately, during this time that we find ourselves in right now, this emergency situation with COVID, the increasing amount of lack of transparency in terms of public governance, the lack of transparency with communities. This is indicative again of the lack of transparency, of the fact that we don't have details, and if there are details, that frankly, they're not being shared with us intentionally. When I say us, I don't mean just us as Bellflower, but cities, is really of high concern. I know that I, for a fact, won't forget this. The fact that we just had a news article that came out this weekend where the chair of the board for LASA herself, who is not an elected representative, has already started making comments to the effect that this is not going to be temporary. So when we have unelected members of the community that are making public policy and imposing it on cities, potentially for the long run, is completely wrong, and it's very highly troubling. And again, I think this project, while well-intentioned by the governor and by the board of supervisors here, I really, really think that it's just a reflection of bad public policy. And again, I just want to go on record saying that as of right now, I haven't gotten new updates with regard to whether this hotel has been finalized or not. But I think the fact that we're getting ahead of this and we're informing the community and starting to make this something that we're aware of is important, so that if and when this happens, the Bellflower is better prepared to be able to handle this. So those are my comments. I'm not sure that anybody else has any other comments that they want to share. Okay, so here.
Yeah, Juana.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I do. Ray Dutton here. Two things. One thing was, I just wanted to pretty much take advantage of the special meeting with my colleagues as being disclosure, since we can talk about this together, you know, so we don't violate a Brown Act or whatever. I think we ought to direct the attorney maybe to reach out to Judge Carter. And I know we have our own Emergency Powers Act, but I think maybe, you know, since we're a friend, he's the first one that's got into LA County with the strategy of a temporary homeless shelter. And I think he should know what the county is doing. And also, the other day I was talking to Juan, and I told him I wanted to reach out to the media. And I have been talking to the media, but I haven't reached out in a way where it was to be public yet. Juan asked me to, you know, put the brakes on this until today after this meeting or whatever. And I think it was a good idea, because I actually got couple little questions with the lack of research that's out there, or the material that's out there. And I think I'm going to move forward now with this, and I just wanted everybody to know what I was planning to do. So with that, that's all my comments.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Dutton. Any other, my colleagues have any final comments?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, this is Mayor Pro Tem Coops.
Yes, please.
So Carl, do you think that apparently what we've learned is that Judge Carter is going to be hearing a case with Bell Gardens in another city, and I got to believe that he's, based on what we know of the man, that he's going to try to get these homeless off the street, and Bell Gardens, the other city, will not be the winner in that discussion. Does he have the power, the judge, to circumvent what the governor and the county has done to set Bellflower aside, or does he not have that authority?
Sorry, I am envisioning Judge Carter and his courtroom and Judge Carter's style on this. So it's difficult for me to answer that question for the following reasons. One is that it's an issue of federalism, meaning that the federal government does not have legal power over the governor's decision with regard to protecting public health and safety. The federal government does have power with regard to making the determination of whether there's been a violation of the U.S. Constitution, providing funding for certain things and what have you. So realistically, I don't actually know what the basis of the lawsuit is for it to land in federal court. So I can't tell you specifically what the arguments are from Bell Gardens and Lawndale in the county of Los Angeles. I have not looked at the pleadings in the case. I just know anecdotally that the hearing, and we double checked the court hearing schedule, is being held today in front of Judge Carter. So if there are realistic federal arguments that lands this in federal court, then the answer to your question is yes, Judge Carter has the ability to rule upon that and make a determination. Absolutely. Can he override the governor? That's unlikely. Unless the governor has actually violated the U.S. Constitution or federal law, it would be very difficult for Judge Carter to make a determination that the governor's actions or the county's actions are incorrect under the circumstances of this emergency. It goes back to my original observations on police powers of the state are very broad under these circumstances. And notwithstanding what you hear during White House briefings, it is not the federal government that makes the determination of Californians' public health and safety. It's the governor's office that makes that determination. So, and that's actually preserved in the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. I don't think that there's any serious dispute about that. That's a very long-winded response to you, but again, I don't have all the facts at my fingertips to give you a bright line analysis of it. I guess I would rely upon my observation that if there are legitimate federal questions involved, then absolutely Judge Carter has the ability to rule upon them. But in principle, he does not have the ability to overcome the determinations of the governor or the county with regard to emergency decisions.
Okay, so I'm going to, say what Mr. Dutton said. Try to communicate with Judge Carter in any way you can to find out where we're going with, we feel he's our buddy on this thing, and he's probably the only card we have to play based on what you just said initially when I asked if this is like a War Powers Act where the state, they can, and the county can do what they want to. We've just got to deal with it best we can and try to put some provisions in there that we're protecting the community. But if they want it, they're going to have it. And we're just along for the ride. And like you said, we can mount a big legal defense or go out, but why would we spend the money to do so when we know inevitably we're going to lose? So, I can kind of see why they chose that site, only because it can serve, Paramount, Bellflower, Long Beach. It's a quarter mile from Lakewood. It meets all that criteria. But again, I don't want to talk in favor of the county. I'm just speculating as to that location does work out to that advantage. On the other side, if I were a Motel 6 executive, I'd be concerned of how this is going to I can use the term damage or change my brand forever. You know, who's going to say, hey, that's not that homeless place? I mean, it changed the whole dynamic of that company. I mean, they're leaving the light on for everybody that shouldn't be there for the long run. So, but again, they may not be along for the ride either. They're just being imposed upon like we are. But there's my comments.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember Hamada, Sana Ynez, any final comments? Just.
Oh, yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Just quickly, I did have a chance to do a drive through the parking lots. I want to mention that. And it's just, what came to mind immediately is if this is established, then I assume the county is going to put up any necessary signs. And also, how will they control the incoming traffic and outgoing? I know they're free to go. Anybody who's going to stay there is free to leave, and but any of the general public who's not going to know about this facility, and they see a motel driving along the freeway, they're going to maybe stop and check, and of course if they're going to be allowed to go all the way in, that's it's going to maybe cause some potential conflicts. So the county, if this is to be established, may need to look at some further traffic control measures to make sure that those who belong there are the ones that are going to be able to drive in only and leave only, and anybody else they'll need to pass by. All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you so much, Councilmember. Okay, so again, just those are the final comments. I think considering everything, I think it would be recommended, because of our limited legal options as of right now. I personally would recommend that we just basically wait and see how this thing evolves, and that per our city attorney's recommendation, that we do the regular and emergency ordinance regarding the second response cost. So I'm not sure if there's any colleagues that have any other opinions, thoughts?
Mayor?
Yes,
Ray
sir.
Dunn here. Do we want to go on the record as a council that it is our, possibly our displeasure of what's going on? But even though we've all voiced it, and do we want to do it in a more formality?
Carl, if we do the urgency ordinance, can they put that in the findings in the of the ordinance itself when you go in?
Oh, I think the council's aware about how snarky I can be, so I'm sure.
Yeah, I know. I think, Ray, we can cover your sentiments in that urgency ordinance if you choose to go forward with that.
All right, as long as he makes it a little more colorful than usual.
Yeah, we'll drop some F-bombs in there.
Okay, there we go.
I think I concur with Councilmember Dunn. I think it's important that this be codified in the history of the, so very important. Again, I like me on a personal level, I have nothing against this program. I see the intention. I just think that in the case of our city, the fact that we're doing the right thing, that's my issue.
Well, so I would say that to distill it, it's matters of notice and equity, right? I mean, yeah.
So, okay. So with that, so I will make a motion for us to direct staff to draft a regular and emergency ordinance for Monday's council meeting that addresses the second response cost.
Second.
Okay. So I have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Dutton.
Aye.
Councilmember Hamada.
Aye.
Councilmember Santinas.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Coops.
Aye.
Mayor Garza.
Aye. Great. Thank you so much, Madam City Clerk, for that. And so with that, before we adjourn, I'm not sure if there's any members of the public that would like to make any comments at this point. All right, so seeing none, it is 11:25 on my watch, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.